We have an animated audience out there. That's good. My name is Chuck DeVore. I'm the Vice President of National Initiatives for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. It's my honor today to move us to our next phase in our discussion about local government. Just as a kind reminder, if you do have some urgent business to attend to on your personal devices, the rest of us don't want to hear it. So please put them on silent so that we can continue forward. What I'd like to do is begin this afternoon by introducing the Honorable Art Martinez de Vara. He's going to give us our invocation. He is the Executive Director of the Texas Local Government Center, an attorney. Don't hold that against him, though. He's a historian and an author as well. He served as the mayor of Von Ormy, Texas from 2007 to 2015, and that's one of our favorite places because they figured out how to cut taxes in that jurisdiction and still provide needed government services. Who knew that that could actually happen? His law firm, the Martinez de Vara Law Firm, I guess this is where we have kind of the commercial for you, represents both cities and Texans fighting back against local government overreach, including annexation issues, municipal incorporation, and complex municipal litigation. Ladies and gentlemen, to deliver our invocation, the Honorable Art Martinez de Vara.
Thank you. If you'll join me and bow your heads. Heavenly Father, we want to give thanks to you today for this gathering. We ask you to bless all of those who have attended, all of our speakers, all of those who helped prepare this meal. We ask for a safe journey home. We ask for open minds and open hearts that we may learn and share our collective experiences together with one another, that we may be better public servants, that we may better serve our communities. Father, we pray for our fellow Texans and our fellow Americans who've been devastated by our recent hurricanes and our shooting in Las Vegas. We ask that you keep them and protect them and see them through their time of trouble. For these things we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Art. Next, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce someone who is significantly active on multiple levels of government, all in a good way. You have to always qualify that these days when you say someone's active in government by specifying that they're active on the side of freedom and liberty and all that is good and right. And of course, I'm speaking of Councilmember Ellen TROXCLAIR from our own city of Austin. Yes. Obviously, her reputation precedes her, and that's a good thing in this audience. She is a city council member for Austin District 8, was elected to office in 2014, and was the youngest woman elected to the Austin City Council at the time. Perhaps at some point in the distant future that will pass to someone else, but for right now, she holds the record. After graduating from the University of Texas, she began a decade-long career in public policy. In her capacity in the state capitol, where many of us at the Texas Public Policy Foundation are used to going to her with supplications and asking for the interest of both her and her boss, who we are delighted to work with on a number of issues. In that capacity, she works with local constituents, municipalities, state agencies, interest groups, and researching and developing policy that often turns into statute, into law. She currently serves in her day job, day job, night job, I guess she's got two different jobs going on here, as the chair of the City Council's Audit and Finance Committees. Always good to have someone who cares about liberty on the Audit and Finance Committee when you're spending other people's money. Also represents the city on the Regional Affordability Committee and the Capital Area Council of Governments. She's a member for St. David's Foundation, Neil Kasarik Foundation Scholarship Fund, longtime volunteer with Meals on Wheels, steward of the Wild with the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, and is a member as well of Ballet Austin's Board of Directors. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Councilmember Ellen TROXCLAIR.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's just a pleasure to be a part of this event and to come back as a speaker to an organization that I have long respected ever since my days at the Capitol. So thank you to TPPF for having me. Carl Sandburg said, "Love your neighbor as yourself, but don't take down the fence." What a deep truth that is for us here at home. While the federal and state government easily grab the national headlines and take our attention and steal the major issues of the day, we often neglect to walk the fence line of our own homesteads, to mine the perimeter of our rights in our own cities and towns. What happens in the faraway capitals of society often affects us less than what is going on right here in our own municipalities, in our own backyards. Here in Austin, as you know, I am the only conservative on a council of 11, a council that often votes to expand by leaps and bounds the role of government in your life. There's a nationally coordinated effort to advance progressive causes on the local level that has yet to meet its match from those who support liberty-minded policies. With Republicans dominating the state and federal government, the left has increasingly focused on cities and school boards to push their agenda, and to be frank, they're succeeding. During the most recent presidential election, 27 counties in a state as red of Texas, totaling 43% of the popular vote, went blue. This included some of our most populous counties and largest cities: Austin, Houston, Dallas, San Antonio, and El Paso. Travis County has only one conservative amongst 5 members of their governing board. AISD has no conservatives, neither does the Austin Community College or Central Health. This scary trend is what is leading to our affordability crisis here in Central Texas and is undermining the economic prosperity that has been brought on by the Texas Miracle, the low-tax, reasonable regulatory environment that has led Texas to be such a successful state. Like many of us here, I love Austin, red or blue. I have a love-hate relationship with it sometimes, but I love our natural beauty, our parks, our culture, the opportunities it provides my family and I, all things that I know that the conservative movement are protecting as the real party of freedom, people and of freedom. But without ensuring a balance of political philosophies and promoting diversity of thought, Austin and other municipalities across Texas could be fast-tracking their way to be the next San Francisco or Detroit, becoming an echo chamber for posturing social justice warriors, while the city mysteriously becomes increasingly unaffordable for the very people they purport to care about. It has become increasingly clear to me that local government has quietly become the first frontier in the fight for individual liberty, free markets, and limited government. Austin infamously passed regulations that drove Uber and Lyft, of course, to cease operations in the city. Austin has also criminalized short-term rentals with a goal of phasing them out of Austin by 2022. And we all know about the infamous plastic bag ban of the city council. The city council has enacted mandates and penalties for private businesses, whether it's hiring practices or mandatory sick leave policies. These policies will hurt small business the most. They are proven to hurt small businesses the most. The large businesses are the ones that can pay to keep up with these ever-increasing regulations. But the small businesses are the backbone of our American economy, and the city council seems to be set out to destroy them. Just yesterday, the council replaced Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, focusing on and my amendment to celebrate both that many other cities have adopted to recognize both the spirit of exploration and discovery that Columbus envisioned and accomplished, and the suffering by the Native Americans whose lands were taken died for a lack of second. Not even one other person on council was willing to discuss the fact that they are both worthy of celebration. Yesterday, and instead of creating the coming together, the welcoming city that we always talk about, we are creating an environment of cultural division and eroding American exceptionalism instead of addressing the policies that I hear most about from my constituents and are consistently on the top of every poll that I see about what people in Austin are actually concerned about, which of course are taxes, spending, and traffic. Council has diverted significant resources away from basic city functions, such as public safety and traffic infrastructure, towards programs such as endless subsidized housing, bike lanes, legal services for illegal immigrants, hiring lobbyists and consultants. In fact, some of you may know, Austin spends the most money of any Texas city on contract lobbyists. That means your tax dollars going to support the continuation of Austin's policies at the state level. The council actively supports and enacts measures that violate both state and federal immigration policy and uses tax dollars to lobby the respective capitals to adopt their radical agendas. Excessive development requirements infringe on private property rights and have greatly contributed to the housing affordability crisis we have in Austin. Using monopoly utility services to make large, unaffordable solar purchases, mandate composting, and limit people's rights to water our own lawns. And until last year, we weren't even allowed to wash your own car in your own driveway. I mean, what is more American than spending a Saturday afternoon washing your own car in your own driveway? Anyway, meanwhile, of course, the city's utility, the Austin Energy, is subsidizing the city's general fund to the tune of $150 million every year. So those rates, that when you wonder why your utility bill is so high, it is because it is the slush fund for the rest of the city of Austin's budget. It's going to fund all of these policies that I just named. And of course, don't get me started on rising property taxes. The city council, this current council in particular, has raised taxes by nearly 8% in 8 of the last 11 years. A trend that is absolutely unsustainable and completely unprecedented in the city of Austin, by the way. If you look historically, for the past 30 years, we have come nowhere near a repeat, even 2 years in a row, of anywhere near 8%. And yet, 8 of the last 11 years have been at the maximum state allowed increase of 8% without risking a rollback election. This trend will mean that your property taxes will double in the next 9 years. And to support all of these regulations and mandates, the city has amassed a bureaucracy of over 13,000 full-time employees. Combine all of those with the 88 boards and commissions we have appointed by council, and a council that meets constantly. We meet every week. Our council meetings alone are over 12 hours normally, every single week. We have work sessions every Tuesday. We have other committee meetings, you name it. We are constantly meeting. That's a lot of time spent thinking about how the government, not the private sector, can try to solve problems that they shouldn't be involved in solving. Sorry, I'm switching to electronic here. So this, of course, comes with annual pay raises. The 13,000 city employees are getting annual pay raises that are well above market value. Unsustainable pensions, and a ballooning minimum wage of nearly $15 an hour, a policy that has been shown in other cities to make people bring home less money than they would have otherwise. Again, hurting the very people that these policies are supposed to support and absolutely undermining their ability to provide for their family. Consider the impact and underlying intent behind the snowballing bureaucracy. For the 2018 fiscal year, the city of Austin passed a $3.9 billion budget, with a B, almost $4 billion spent at the city level. And other major cities are not that far behind. Houston's budget was $2.3 billion, San Antonio, $2.7 billion, Fort Worth, $1.7 billion, and Dallas, $3.1 billion. San Antonio, which the argument is often, well, those cities don't own their own utilities. Well, San Antonio does. And San Antonio adopted a budget of $2.7 billion compared to Austin's almost $4 billion. Kevin Williamson with the National Review articulated this concept well in his book, What Doomed Detroit? Detroit is an extreme example of the fact that public sector employment has become, in effect, a supplementary welfare state with salaries and benefits, and above all else, pensions, entirely disconnected from legitimate municipal purposes. Unionized public sector employees with a high degree of political discipline, fortified by narrow financial self-interest, become an unstoppable constituency, and the government becomes its own special interest group. And that is exactly what's happening in Austin. Rick Perry always likes to call Austin the blueberry in the tomato soup, and that's an analogy that I've always found entertaining. But it's scary to think that there are more blueberries popping up in our tomato soup of very red Texas. This imbalance is not limited to Austin. Other major cities in the state are pushing progressive menu of initiatives as well. Much of this past legislative session, as you know, was focused on overturning anti-liberty, anti-free market policies passed by local municipalities across Texas. We were at some point engaged in the conversation about local control. Well, isn't local control a good thing? Isn't local control what conservatives have always fought for? The reason that conservatives valued the principle of local control is because the government that is closest to the people is the most likely to protect those individuals and their rights. But when it's not being used for that purpose, it is not a valuable tool in and of itself. When it is instead being used to undermine those rights and liberties and restrict people's abilities to provide for their families, then it is time for the state to step in. I testified in the House and Senate, met with legislators, submitted written testimony, much to the dismay of my other council colleagues, by the way, who chastised me in a public work session that although I was permitted to disagree with them while inside the confines of City Hall, I was under no circumstances to go to the state capitol and say anything that was different than the city's adopted legislative agenda. And I had to tell them, I'm sorry, I did not remember giving up my right to free speech when I ran for office. Instead, I feel the exact opposite, that I have an even greater responsibility to represent not only my beliefs, but the beliefs of the many constituents who otherwise their voices go unheard. I had a few people say to me, well, isn't this just the same as government overreach from Washington, D.C.? You know, Washington, D.C. sends all these mandates and the state complains about them, and now the state's doing the same thing. Well, there is a difference between requiring that an individual or business do or don't do something, such as fingerprint their employees or be unpermitted to rent out their property, and telling local governments that they cannot impede on those individuals and businesses' right to do so. That is a really critical difference that has been caught in this conversation. Of course, other issues that the legislature took up were permitting reform, school choice, debt transparency, free market hiring practices, and annexation. While taxpayer-funded lobbyists representing city governments have significant influence at the legislature, there were a number of wins, including reasonable ride-sharing regulations and annexation, which TPPF was instrumental in. But of course, it's not enough. The legislature should not be focused on expanding, the legislature should be focused on expanding liberty for the people of Texas, not allowing local governments to claim that liberty as a right of theirs alone. Full of quotes today, gonna give you one from Patrick Henry. He said, guard with jealous attention the public liberty. Suspect everyone who approaches that jewel. Unfortunately, nothing will preserve it but downright force. Whenever you give up that force, you are inevitably ruined. Trust me, I know. It's a lot easier to keep track of what's going on the federal level. I can't say that I have quite as many Twitter followers as the president, or that I speak in quite the colorful terms that he does. But it is really important for us to not forget that really the local level is where liberty is being taken away. From your utility bills to property taxes, permits on businesses and development, and the roads you drive every day, we cannot give up the fight at the local level. Okay, it's not all doom and gloom. It is a lot of doom and gloom, but I will tell you it's not all doom and gloom, and here are some things that you can do to turn it around. In 2014, a grassroots effort led by conservative groups and minority groups joined with dedicated, committed candidates to actually putting the 10-1 system on the ballot. We went from an at-large system in Austin to a district-based system, which allowed us to elect 3 fiscal conservatives on the council, one being Don Zimmerman, who I see right here today. Of course, I'm very sad that he and Sherry Gallo ultimately lost their next election. But I want to talk about some of the things that we accomplished while they were on the council. We were only 3 out of 11, but together we passed a homestead exemption, reduced property taxes, blocked unnecessary spending, eliminated $100 million in affordable housing subsidies, drove major investments in roads, eliminated unnecessary permitting requirements, repealed unnecessary criminalization of juveniles, and most importantly, gave a platform to a point of view that was never previously represented. Unfortunately, being the last standing conservative at council, I am often now unable to even get one single co-sponsor for a resolution that I would like to bring forward. We need 4 council members to put something on the agenda, and in order to make a motion to change something during discussion, make an amendment to something that's on the agenda, you need a second. So it's really frustrating. This past year, for example, the homestead exemption, this is something that the mayor was elected on and many other council members were elected on. We voted by a large majority our first year to get to a 20% homestead exemption within 4 years. Here we are 3 years in, and I could not get a single council member to sign on to my resolution this year to even talk about the ability for the city to increase the homestead exemption. We're at 8%, we should be at 15%, and I'm losing hope that number will ever increase. In fact, there were questions from council members during budget cycle this time about whether or not they could reduce the property tax exemption to get those dollars back. It's so frustrating. So, all right, I'm supposed to be positive in this part, right? I'm encouraging you to engage, to educate, to focus. Most importantly, you've got to support good candidates. It does not matter if local elected if somebody running for office is not in your district. It does not matter, where they are. If you believe in them and you think that they can make a positive difference in your city or your county or a nearby city or county that you care about, please support them, contribute to them, block walk for them, get involved in their campaigns, send them a nice email every once in a while. That's always nice to get an email from a constituent saying that they appreciate what I'm doing. That really is what it comes down to, is we have to get people who, I know that the city of Austin's like 35% Republican, and yet I'm the only person on an 11-member council that is a fiscal conservative. So those numbers don't add up, and our power is so much greater than what we've demonstrated so far. And please consider running for office. I mean, I never thought that I would be running for office. I was very happy as a Capitol staffer. I loved working for Representative Isaac. I was very engaged in state politics and policies. The reason that I ran for office was because after that change, I still remember talking to you at a Republican club and saying, I think I want to run for office for city council. It was never something that I considered. I was always happy to be the person behind the scenes. I'm terrified of public speaking. I've had to do it a few times now, but when that change happened, I knew that there was a potential for us to elect somebody, at least in my district of Southwest Austin, that was going to have a little bit more common sense. That's all I wanted. I just wanted someone with a little bit more common sense than what we'd had in the past. And so I got together with a couple of other friends and said, "Hey, let's talk to the people who are running. Let's all contribute some money and give it to the candidate that we're excited about. There were 4 people in the race, and not a single one of them was talking about fiscal responsibility or property taxes or these other really pressing issues that I feel like are leading Austin to destruction. I tried to convince my husband to run and a couple of other friends, and you know, it's hard to step up and do it. But ultimately, I said, if I don't do it, if I have the opportunity and I don't do it, then I can't complain. And truly, it was about a week before the filing deadline. I was very late to the game, but man, I'm so glad I did it, because here I am 3 years later, and I really feel like I've been able to make a difference. Another couple ways that I have been able to make a difference is getting involved in an organization called the American City County Exchange. They asked me to be their national chair this year and actually next year. It's an organization, if some of you are familiar with ALEC, it is the sister organization for local elected officials who care about liberty and limited government. Nothing like that exists for our local elected officials. From the state level, you have TPPF, you have caucuses, you have policy work groups, you have all of this information that you can depend on as a member or as a staffer for what policies you should pursue and how you should vote on certain items. None of that kind of infrastructure exists at the local level for a conservative council member. And the organizations that do exist, the National League of Cities and a couple of I think the National Association of Mayors, that's not the right name, but they are all completely dominated by left-leaning leaders, and they are all completely focused on how to grow the size of government. So when I found out that ALEC was launching this new organization called ACE to do exactly what I was looking for, it was so exciting. I got involved immediately, and I'm really hoping to help them grow the organization over these next couple years. So if you know anybody from any city or county from across the country who would be interested in getting involved, please let me know. I would love to have them join us. You know, and it's given me a really surprising platform to speak about issues on the state and national level. A lot of times, I'm not going to lie, a lot of times I feel like I'm going to City Hall to bang my head against a brick wall every day, and you know, I get a lot of headaches. But ultimately, it has really kind of opened this door. Being a young conservative in such a liberal city, people are interested in the work that I'm doing and what I have to say about how we can solve our city's problems in a collaborative way, and how I've been able to work with other council members to do that. I was at a meeting the other day with other elected officials from across the country, and one of them, a mayor in another Texas city, said, "Ellen, I watched the City of Austin budget discussions the other day, and I was really inspired by the way that you fought for taxpayers." Well, first, I was shocked that anybody actually watched the city council meetings, because, I mean, they're boring enough to when you're actually there, but I can't imagine not living in the city and still having time to watch those 12-hour meetings. But he said, I just want to tell you that it really inspired me, because I know it must be frustrating to you, but I went back to my city and I fought for a more fiscally restrained budget than I would have otherwise. And so you made a difference not only for your own tax-paying citizens, but for people in my district as well, for people in my city as well. That's amazing. And the stories like that are really what inspire me to keep me going. Okay, how can I wrap this up in an inspirational way? You know, it's not easy, it's not fun. People ask me all the time, not as much anymore, because I think they're realizing that it's not fun, but for the first 2 years, people would ask me all the time, "Are you having fun?" And I thought, well, I mean, not really, but but that's also not why I ran. I didn't run. I mean, if I was looking for something to do that's fun, I'm gonna like take a hot air balloon ride over Napa or something, not run for Austin City Council. So you know, but I really struggled with how to answer that question, because people are being nice and they're just trying to make conversation. But now I just tell them, no, it's not fun. It's really difficult. It's a really big sacrifice. But I think it's really important, and I couldn't do it without a lot of the people in this room who have been really great supporters and really inspirational to me. So your support really means a lot. And just know we're going into elections next November. Please, there's 5 council seats that are up for election, including mine. Please pay attention, please get involved, and please support candidates that you believe in. Thanks.
Well, that was wonderful. Thank you for your observations. I can't imagine what it must be like to serve on a body where you can't even get a second on a motion. So I don't think you're off the hook yet, though, although that was a very graceful exit. I think that there's actually quite a few people who might want to ask you a question or two before we go to our forum entitled Problem Solving for Small Towns. You're not in a small town, you're in a gigantic town. So let me perhaps start things off and ask you a question, and then we have some folks, I think, perhaps with microphones. So when you do ask a question, please make it a question and not a soliloquy, because we want to hear more from Ellen. So let me ask you, though, what do you think is the prime motivating philosophy of your colleagues on the council? I mean, when you hear them speak, is there some sort of a consistent worldview that you could label? For example, progressivism or union liberalism. What is it that seems to drive their decisions on a day-to-day basis? And is that a majority or simply a plurality? Are there even shifting alliances on the left?
That's a good question. I think that there are shifting alliances, that I have definitely been able to work with other council members on things that we see eye to eye on. I'll give you a quick example. Just recently, we were able to pass major reforms to the way that the city of Austin spends hotel occupancy taxes. The fund of hotel occupancy taxes, which of course is what people pay when they come to stay in Austin, has doubled in 4 years from $50 million to almost $100 million. And 80% of that money previously went to the Convention Center and Visitors Bureau. Actually 85%. State law allows the city to spend up to 15% on cultural arts, which we do, and up to another 15% on parks and historic preservation, which often include our parks. Which the city did not spend any money on. I mean, up to 15%, we're talking about $13 million here. So, and I know that the Convention Center and Visitors Bureau is a really important part of our tourist business. A lot of people are coming to Austin to go to conventions, but there are a lot of people who are coming to Austin for a lot of other reasons besides that. And I thought it was important to make changes so that our parks and our historic preservation sites that people are coming to the city to see are paid for by tourist dollars instead of basically paid for by your property taxes out of the general fund. So I was able to work with a coalition of 4 other council members on a very difficult, very complex, something that we've been working on for probably 2 years. And ultimately, was able to make that change in this last budget cycle. Really, a very significant financial shift for the city that I'm hoping will help to ease the property tax burden going forward. But of course. Well, now I have to add another quick story to that. But of course, as soon as I found, I was able to offset the South by Southwest subsidy. We were paying for a subsidy for South by Southwest to the tune of about $1.5 million out of property taxes, out of our general fund, instead of out of tourist dollars, which is ridiculous to me. That's South by Southwest is one of the biggest tourist attractions in the entire country, and it is by far the number one reason that tourists are coming to Austin. So I was able to get that out of the general fund and basically free up a significant chunk of money that I tried to apply immediately to lowering the tax rate. But unfortunately, as soon as, the frustration of mine is when I am able to come up with money like that, it is almost immediately spent by the rest of council. So I'll have to think of maybe a different strategy next year. But anyway, I don't know what it is that define. And I think that define. I don't know if there's a term that defines or an ideological mantra that defines the rest of council. And I think that they are all very different, but they all tend to kind of walk the same line when it comes to certain social issues. And I don't really like using the word progressive because I think that conservatives are progressive. I think that there's lots of things that we're doing that are innovative and interesting. And I don't like having that kind of a word with, to me, a positive connotation being applied to an ideology that I believe is setting people back in their ability to accomplish things in their lives. Okay, lots more questions. Yes? Oh, sorry, both of you, but either one.
Oh, go ahead. Thank you. I can certainly emphasize with you, I spent several years on a city council where I was the only conservative, but it was in another state.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that can happen in the great state of Texas.
I know.
But I'm really proud of you and what you have accomplished and
Thank
what
you.
you're trying to accomplish.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
On the Uber deal, what was the reason that the city council took the stand they did? And I heard Adler speak one time that he felt like the city of Austin's thought process and technology was way ahead of Uber, something like that. Yeah,
He did.
yeah.
He said
I've
on multiple occasions that the city government was innovating too fast for
right.
Uber and Lyft.
And I heard him say that. So what was the main reason? Were they just scared of Uber? Why did they take the stand they did? What was the logic?
The reason, a lot of times, actually, I think that Councilmember Zimmerman said this first. A lot of times that the reason that issues come to council is because there's some community uproar about something. This was not one of those things. The reason that I first heard about this was because the taxi company owners came and talked to me about it and said we really need to level the playing field. And so in the early conversations, I listened to them and I tried to understand where they were coming from, and I talked to them about leveling the playing field in terms of how about we reduce regulations on your companies, and then you can maybe compete more freely. And of course through the next year or so, it became really evident that they weren't interested in that. I think that I think it's difficult to understand why those technologies were different than a taxi if you've never used them. And I'm not sure that a majority of the council had ever been in a ride sharing. And so my attempts, I tried from the dais to explain that really this was so much bigger than fingerprinting. There's a whole pie of like public safety. You're getting a picture of the driver, you're seeing their license plate. I can send my route in real time to my husband so he knows exactly where I am and who I'm in the car with, and when I'm supposed to be home. And those things are not things that are offered in a traditional taxi. And so I actually offered an amendment one time to say, if this is really about public safety, then we should require, and you guys aren't going to go the way of reducing regulations, then why don't we require taxi companies to also incorporate those safety measures into their platforms? And it was unsuccessful. So I think it really spun out of control. Like there was not. We were not having a fact-based discussion. None of our conversations were data-driven. They were very emotional from the beginning, and in part because of the way Uber kind of approached the issue and then ultimately ran the campaign. Certainly a lot of mistakes were made on their part by that. But I'm happy. My district actually voted to reject the city's regulations and support the regulations in Prop 1. So I was proud of my district for that. Yes.
What is the conservative or libertarian position on Code Next?
Oh, that's a really good question. I don't know if it's going to be too detailed for some of the people, I don't know where everybody's from in this room, but yeah, Code Next is the rewrite of our land development code, and my position is that absolutely one of the reasons that housing is that our city is so expensive is because it is incredibly difficult to build here, and it is incredibly expensive, and it is incredibly time consuming to get through the government process. There is just example after example of people who have been put through the ringer unnecessarily, and comparisons made between how expensive it is to build something like an apartment complex in Austin compared to another city like Dallas. So my hope through this process is that we're streamlining, that we're reducing the sheer number of regulations and pages and complications involved in the process. I'm not sure, somehow I thought that the first draft of Code Next would either really make the development community mad or really make the neighborhood community mad, but it somehow managed to piss them both off. So we're in a little bit of a quandary, and I'm worried that we're kind of heading down the path of passing something just to say that we did it. We're in draft 2 right now. Draft 3 will be out shortly, and I think ultimate adoption is supposed to be no later than April of next year. But ultimately, there's still, I don't know if there's a conservative stance other than to say we should, to the extent possible, we need to let the free market drive what can be built on, if there's demand for apartment complexes on a certain piece of land, we need to listen to that demand and listen to those market forces. That's the only way that we are going to get costs down. We've been given reports that we need to build 135 new units, multifamily and single family, over the next 10 years. The plan so far only even gives us the potential to, in an ideal world, if everything was absolutely maxed out, that's outlined in the code, of about 160,000, which the numbers aren't quite matching up there. If you're needing, one of my staff compared it to if you need a proposition to pass, and you need 135,000 votes, you're going to send out a heck of a lot more than 160,000 mailers to get there. So I'm not sure if the math makes sense, and we need to be aware that as we've been told multiple times by city, we cannot subsidize our way out of this problem. If you look at the problem solely from how much affordable subsidized housing does the city quote unquote need, it is not possible to get there, not mathematically even a possibility. So what we need to do is focus on how we can increase supply in order to reduce market rates, market rents, so that regular people in the middle class can afford to have an apartment or live in a house in this city. Yes.
I'd like you to comment on the city's debt. J.P. Morgan put out a report in the last couple of days that has Austin right near the top nationally of the next city to go bankrupt.
I haven't seen that yet, but I would love for you to share that with me, because I think it's really, really important. The city has a lot of debt, and we do so much issuance of certificates of obligation, which is non-voter approved debt. I mean, it's one thing if you take a case to the voters and they say, yeah, we're willing to spend $90 million on a library, even though the city has now spent $125 million on it. But it's another thing when you're just issuing debt, non-voter approved debt, without even asking whether or not people are willing to go into debt for it. So please share that with me. I would be really interested to read it.
They included pension debt.
Yes. Oh, of course. Yes. Anyone else? And while he's getting the mic, I'll say to you and your question or your comment earlier, I actually had at one of these conferences that I went to, I had another, I'll just say, I know there's I think a member of media here, so I don't want to say who it was, but it was a member of another big Texas city who was a liberal Democrat, and said, Ellen, I wish that your council would realize that they're making it so much harder for the rest of us, because every time they poke the state of Texas in the eye purposefully on all these issues, it's creating expense for us. It's creating difficulty for us because we're doing okay where we are without the state government's involvement. So I said, you know what? I think that would be a really important message for them to hear. You should come tell them, because they're not listening to me. So.
Councilmember, thanks for the opportunity. I'm glad the previous speaker mentioned the pensions, because I would include the police, fire, EMS, all the public pensions that are, and the contracts for them that are so opaque, the contracting process. And I'd be interested in your comments on that, on the public safety side. And also, it's not too soon to be thinking about the other place that we won and lost some battles at the local level, and that was when the 10-1 districts were created, and those districts will be redistricted here in 3 years or so. And I'd be interested in your comments on what we can be doing at the local level to affect that redistricting process.
Okay. On the redistricting process, honestly, it's not something that I have really been focused on yet. So it's good to have a reminder that is happening. Roger probably might know more about about the ins and outs of that than I do, if you want to follow up with him afterwards. But that's a really good point, that's probably something that we need. Clearly the districts, I'm not, like I said before, the makeup of the council is not reflective of the makeup of the city. So clearly there are probably some issues in how the lines were drawn in the first place. And so I think that's an important thing to be involved in. What was your first question? Forgot already.
Public safety.
Oh, public safety. Yeah. So our police and fire contracts are undergoing negotiations right now. I guess was the fire adopted? Fire was adopted the other day. So 70% of the city's budget is spent on public safety. It's a huge percentage. 70% of the general fund is being spent on public safety. So of course, I mean, I as a fiscal conservative, I think that public safety is one of the things that the city should be doing incredibly well. It's one of the things that we should be spending money on. But of course, we need to make sure that the metrics and the things that we have in place are actually resulting in a safer city, and not just reaching some arbitrary number. Both our policemen and our firemen are paid very well comparatively when you look at other cities across the country. So I know that the city was number 2 on the most recent list I saw of the safest large cities in the country, and hopefully we stay there. But it is definitely a pressure on our budget, and like I said, we need to make sure that to the extent possible, we need that money is directly correlating to safety of the citizens. And I think one of the big problems is that our police officers can't afford to live in the city. I mean, it's too expensive for them. So many of them are living in, Buda, Kyle. They're commuting in every day, and they're not in it. And when you have a police officer that lives in your community, when they're your next door neighbor, it's different, because they get to know you, they get to know your families. They're playing on the little league together. They're your kids are in the same school, et cetera. So you have that kind of connection that the police department is trying to get to with this idea of community policing, which is basically having spare time to kind of just be a part of the community, and not always having your only connection with the police is when there's when there's a crisis or something bad going on. So I don't know that we'll ever make progress on that, considering that property taxes are doubling every 9 years. But I think if the city were more affordable, it would probably, I think it would be a huge help to public safety in Austin. Yes, I think he was first, and then, oh, okay, I'll let you do it.
So what legislative reform do you think would be most helpful in helping to put local government, city government, back in more of a reasonably sized box? Like, would it be restricting certificates of obligation to only emergency use, opening up hot dollars to be used on core services? things like that?
I would say, I'm not sure that I would support opening up hot dollars to be spent on core services because I think that it will just be spent and abused. Probably the requirements that are in place for a good reason. I would say, one of the things that I went and spoke to the legislature about was SB2 and revenue. Well, I don't want to call it revenue caps because that's not like that. We're trying to say that it's not a cap, right? It's just the ability for people to vote on whether or not they want to be taxed more than, say, 4%. And just for those of you who might not know what I'm talking about, we have a rollback rate in Texas of 8%, meaning the city or county government can't increase taxes more than 8% year over year without risking an election by the voters. But you would have to get a petition, which is very cumbersome and time consuming. And even if the petition is successful, you can just get it back to 8%, which is still incredibly high. Austin is one of the only cities in the state that is even near that. And I was absolutely shocked at the level of opposition that I saw, not from TML and from other conservative local leaders from across the state. They really banged on that local control drum. And I said, well, what is your city doing? And they would say, well, average about 2% a year. Okay, well, well, we might need we need the flexibility in case there's some event that happens. Don't you think that the ability for you to make a case to your voters for whatever that event is, it provides you with plenty of flexibility? I mean, for the city of Austin, that reform would be huge. There were so many talking points that came out of the legislature that said, this would not actually reduce your property taxes. In Austin, it would. Your property taxes will be higher next year than they would have been otherwise if that bill had passed. So I'm gonna continue to advocate for that, and I hope that the legislature will come back in the next session and update. It's really just an update of our laws. I mean, that was put in place. That 8% level was put in place in like 1980 when inflation was double digits. We are nowhere near that now. So either we need to lower the rate, or we need to tie it to the rate of inflation, where it can float up and down. And in case there's a period of high inflation, you don't have to come back and change it. I think I would really support either. But that would be huge for the citizens of Austin, and I think it would. I mean, it would require that the city live within its means, or have to make their case to the voters, which I don't, which increasing property taxes is unless you have a really good reason, is a tough one to make. Yes. You want me to pick now? Okay. Well, I know Adam had a question in the back for a while.
Thanks. First up, I hope you're enjoying for once in the blue moon when you get to speak to a friendly audience.
Yes. It's been nice. Thanks for having me.
Yes. So my question is something I brought up several months ago when you had the affordability roadmap discussion, and one of my ongoing frustrations at the citizen level in Austin is that you have a lot of frustration around high housing costs, and you also have a lot of frustration around high property taxes, and yet the people who are upset about each of those important issues seem to be completely constantly talking past each other. So moving forward, what can be done to sort of get those two constituencies that have a decent amount of have more overlap than I think either one of them realizes to stop that?
You said people concerned about high property taxes, and what was the other one?
High housing costs.
High housing costs. Yeah. I agree with you, and I think that the Code Next discussion has somewhat brought together those two groups of people. But honestly, it's just hard to get people to pay attention to what's going on the local level. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Like I think that maybe the second group that you're talking about is kind of the pro density urbanist group. And I think that they are a very important counterbalance to another very strong voice that we have at City Hall, but the number of people who are upset about property taxes is not at all reflected in any of the conversations that we have at City Hall. I mean, they really look at me. I had a reporter during the budget say, "Well, how do you know that your people are upset about property taxes?" And I said, "Well, she asked me if I did a poll." And I said, "No, I didn't do a poll. It's just it's what I talked about on the campaign trail, what I was elected on. It was one of the main platforms. It's what I hear about every single time I go to talk to a homeowners association or anybody else." So I was really shocked by I was really shocked by that question, because I thought, surely that is not our bubble is not so extensive or so complete in City Hall that we don't even that we don't even believe that there is concern about that. So I don't know. I'll think about it. I don't know if I know the answer to your question about how people can kind of how those two groups specifically can better engage. But I think that Code Next is probably the best opportunity, and I think that there has been more discussions, at least between like the development community and the urbanist community, that I've seen happening that will hopefully be productive. Yes. I don't know who was first. Maybe you. So it's more pressure, like having to pick people, than it is to speak.
Your thoughts on the issue of information that's published by cities. One of the things that was said earlier is that Austin is supposed to be a safe city. And the city of Georgetown published a local newspaper showing 6 years of data and claiming a decrease in crime rate. But the only way they could claim that was to look at the first year of data compared to the last year of data. It would have to be lower. And you look at all the ups and downs in between, and it's actually flat, if not increasing. But when you apply the crime rate to the actual population over that time period, there's a 26% increase in crime incidents. Yeah. So constantly cooking the numbers to lie to the public, how do we deal with that?
And you're talking about the city of Georgetown?
Yes.
Yeah. So how do we make those numbers known to the public? Is that your question?
Yeah. How do we get the truth out to the population?
I guess when there's an interesting issue happening or when something's going on, I try to put it in my newsletter and put it on Facebook. And so if y'all aren't connected with me that way, that is always a good way for me to try to get out the word. The more that y'all can share that information is helpful, and the more that you can give me that information, it's helpful. Sometimes one of the biggest challenges at City Hall is you have city staff who most are very nice people and they work very hard, but they have a lot more institutional knowledge than the council does, and that certainly I do, kind of often working alone. So sometimes I don't know what the right questions are to get to the bottom of the data that I'm trying to find. Like the second part of your question, it's that I might be told, hey, the crime rate has gone down over the last 6 years this much, and I don't know what the follow-up question is that I need to ask to get to the truth. So honestly, that is half the battle. And often when I do, then I try to get the word out. But for me, I'm just trying to communicate through social media and through my newsletter. And like I said, if y'all aren't already connected with me that way, please do. I posted on Facebook yesterday something about, I thought it was this Columbus Day thing happened, the Columbus Day versus making it into Indigenous Peoples Day. And I just thought, I had one kind of Italian American group who was really upset about it, who reached out to me, but they didn't know about it until it was basically too late. They weren't able to get anybody at the meeting. And so I posted a couple of the issues on Facebook because I said, I thought that people needed to know about them. And I had somebody ask, one of the commenters said, why are you, if these issues were such a non-tangible, if they don't have any impact, and you're saying that they were a waste of time and that the city wasn't focusing on affordability and all of the other priorities that we should be focusing on, why did you waste your time posting on Facebook? It's like, well, because I have a responsibility to tell people what's going on. And I think that these were a few really big issues that happened this week that nobody knew about. So anyway, I just thought that was an interesting comment. Yes.
A couple years ago, I participated in a study where they were looking at the City of Austin budget. And they were behind a mirror, and there was a group of us, and we were just commenting as citizens. And they showed this pie chart, and it relates to what you mentioned a little bit ago about the City of Austin's budget. The largest item is public safety.
Mm-hmm.
And they were comparing different possible changes going forward to the next year's budget. And it was probably 15 minutes into the discussion, and everybody else there's like 8 of us, and nobody mentioned, and I was trying to figure out how they'd set this up, and there was just an assumption that at that time it was, I think, 560 million, and it was just assumed that the base change was plus 5%. That's just a starting point. They just make the chart, add 5% to that. And at some point I thought, when I'm with a small business, one of my clients are small businesses, we're looking at ways to cut. We're assuming we're going to cut costs, 5 to 10%, and then we're going to add some new thing that we're going to increase spending, but it's to do something else. The things we're doing now, we do for less. And that's been going on for years and years. And so with the city council and the budget, it seems like that's a really good issue to bring up to voters in your next campaign and to publicize through things like Facebook. Hey, they just assume that this, at that time it was $500 million. I'm sure it's much larger now. $500 million? For what? We're going to increase that by 5% to do what? Mm-hmm. Tell me what you're doing with that money.
Mm-hmm.
And if there's not something specific, let's cut 5% instead, like a small business would do. So that's just what I was thinking about from your campaign and publication standpoint.
Right. And that, of course, is one of the biggest differences between the private sector and government. You have competition in the private sector. You have no competition in government. And any industry, anything that does not have competition, you're going to get a more expensive and less efficient product. I mean, that competition is what drives the innovation. It's what drives the affordability. It's what drives the free market, and we don't have that in government. And they go even further, because it's not just that they include the 5% in the chart, a 5% increase in the chart. They do this at the state level too. But if you want to suggest that you only go to the 4% increase the next year, then it's a cut. And then it's just a very dramatic, you're cutting city services, and how are we all going to live? And it's a decrease in the rate of growth, and that is a really important difference that is often lost in the news. But yeah, it's a challenge, and I think that's a really good point. That those cost drivers are just really baked in, and it's kind of up to you to dig into the details and to see what they're going for, and to make sure that there are metrics in place to make the, it's not, as conservatives, I'm not opposed to government. I think that there's absolutely a need for a safety net for people who absolutely need it. I think that there's a need for public safety. And there are basic city services that are really important that government provides. It's just that we get way outside of that scope a lot of times, and we don't have, because we don't have competition, we don't have the challenge of, well, what product is it that what service is it that you're providing? Can you do it for better? Can you do it for less? Our budget process, everybody's just fighting. They know that there's a pie of money available, and every department director wants to get some for their own department. And it's not that, they're really, most of them are really good, hardworking people, but it's just the nature of the system that we've set up, that there is absolutely no incentive to find cost savings. And anybody, I think, would do the same thing in their position. There is just no, if you're in a position where you're rewarded for getting a bigger piece of that pie every single year, it's just human nature to go and do that. And until we change, until we put those kinds of things, those drivers in place that are incentivizing people for the right reasons, it's going to be really difficult to change. So, okay, I see one more question. I don't know how long y'all are wanting me to talk. One more, okay. I can go on forever, but I don't know, that it might get boring after a while. Because I know you've been fascinated so far, right?
Yes. You said that Austin police officers cannot afford to live in Austin. Now, an Austin police officer with 2 years of experience makes $73,000. How many teachers in Austin make $73,000? I don't think that's very many. So if an Austin Police Department officer cannot live here for $73,000 salary, plus benefits, plus his partner's salary, who can afford to live here? Because teachers don't make that kind of money.
Well,
I don't make that kind of money. A lot of people don't make that kind of money, and yet, we assume these things, and we don't make provisions. I mean, I don't know. I mean, that's not a whole lot of money, but on the other hand, it's twice the per capita average.
yeah, it's really difficult for teachers to afford to live in Austin too. I mean, the teachers that I know don't live, my best friend is a teacher and she lives in far South Austin because that's the only place that she could afford. So, I guess I would say that's kind of a whole nother topic and a cause that I think is really important that conservatives take up is teacher pay. Again, it's another system that is highly regulated and I think that the state regulations that the teachers unions have fought for are ultimately hurting our best and brightest teachers and keeping them from making and earning the living that they deserve to earn. I think teachers should be paid way more. And like I said, I think that the system that the unions have supported and adamantly defended at the state level is what has held us back from really giving a really important. Again, it's the same thing. Again, we don't have the right incentives in place to keep the best and brightest around. Another friend of mine who was a really smart, accomplished attorney, she went to work. She just decided that she needed to be fulfilled and got a job in a different way. And she got a job on the east side working at one of the poorest schools in Austin. And she was a really great teacher. And she lasted about 3 years before she was like, I'm out of here. The way that the way that I'm being treated, or the way I'm putting in so much more work, and I'm being paid the same as this other person who's not. She just that's the kind of person that we want, that we hope that will stick around to teach our kids, and she quit. So anyway, that's a whole nother subject for a different day. But certainly, public education is something that is really important to me, and I hope that the legislature will continue to take up the cause of school choice and inserting that competition into the market. And if schools are competing for funding and competing for kids and competing for the best teachers, it will lead to higher pay for teachers.
Wow, that was an awesome presentation by really one of our local heroes. When you think about, you wouldn't really hear much of any of the insane, crazy stuff happening in the city of Austin if it wasn't for Councilmember Ellen TROXCLAIR, would you? So, thank you. So next we have an open forum, and its title is Problem Solving for Small Towns. It's going to start at the bottom of the hour at 1:30 down in our theater on the first floor. It's going to briefly discuss problems specifically facing small towns in Texas, and then transition into an open forum so that you can ask your questions of the panelists and have an opportunity to learn from them. So the next panel is going to start at 1:30. Thank you so much for attending.